the dusty mountains of Afghanistan, where honor is measured in blood and respect is earned through fire, something unprecedented happened. A man who commanded the world's most elite warriors, Navy SEALs who had no name, no rank that mattered in those moments, stood before a woman whose hands had never officially held military rank. Yet in that moment, he saluted her with the deepest respect reserved for fallen heroes. She wasn't supposed to be there. Military policy said women couldn't serve in combat roles. But bullets don't read policy papers. And when Taliban fighters began picking off American soldiers one by one, desperation made rules irrelevant. What followed was a story the Pentagon never wanted told, about a civilian contractor whose deadly accuracy with a rifle would save more lives than any decorated sniper in military history. This is the true story of how a woman with no military training became the most feared sniper in the Afghan theater, and why the most secretive commander in the US military broke every protocol to honor her sacrifice. It's a story about courage that can't be measured by medals, skills that can't be taught in boot camps, and respect that transcends every barrier the military ever built. Her name was never in official reports. Her kills were never officially counted. But the men who fought beside her will never forget the woman who proved that heroism has no gender, no rank, and no rules. Sarah Martinez never intended to become a killer. She came to Afghanistan in 2011 as a civilian contractor, hired by the Department of Defense to provide translation services for remote outposts scattered across Helmand Province. Her job was simple: help American soldiers communicate with local villagers, facilitate negotiations with tribal leaders, and occasionally assist in intelligence gathering. She spoke fluent Pashto and Dari, languages she had learned during her childhood when her father, a diplomat, was stationed in Pakistan. At 28 years old, Sarah was unremarkable in most ways. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, had brown hair that she usually kept tied back in a practical ponytail, and wore the same dusty cargo pants and long-sleeved shirts as every other contractor in the region. What made her different was something she had never mentioned in her security clearance interviews or her contractor application. Back home in Montana, Sarah had grown up hunting with her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. Her grandfather, Thomas Martinez, had been a Marine sniper who served 2 tours in Korea. After the war, he returned to his family ranch in the Bitterroot Mountains, where he spent decades perfecting his marksmanship skills on everything from prairie dogs to elk. When Sarah was old enough to hold a rifle steady, he began teaching her the fundamentals of long-range shooting. She had natural talent that her grandfather recognized immediately. Her breathing was controlled, her hands steady, and most importantly, she could calculate wind speed and bullet drop instinctively. By the time Sarah graduated high school, she could consistently hit targets at 800 yards with her grandfather's old Winchester Model 70. She had planned to join the military after graduation, but her father's diplomatic career opened doors to international relations programs, and she found herself studying languages and cultural anthropology instead of military tactics. Still, every summer she returned to Montana, where her grandfather continued to refine her shooting skills. When Sarah arrived at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Coast Province, she quickly established herself as one of the most effective translators in the region. Unlike many contractors who stayed behind the wire, Sarah volunteered for patrol duties, believing that face-to-face interaction with locals was essential for accurate translation. The soldiers initially resisted having a civilian woman on combat patrols, but her language skills were so superior to their military interpreters that commanders began specifically requesting her services. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rodriguez, who commanded the 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment, was initially skeptical about Sarah's presence on patrols. Military regulations were clear about civilian contractors and combat zones, but the reality of counterinsurgency warfare in Afghanistan made those regulations complicated. Sarah's ability to communicate with village elders and read cultural nuances had already prevented several potential incidents that could have resulted in civilian casualties. During her first month at Chapman, Sarah proved her value repeatedly. She identified a Taliban informant who had been providing information about patrol routes, preventing an ambush that would have killed 6 American soldiers. She negotiated the release of a kidnapped American medic by convincing tribal leaders that Taliban fighters were violating traditional Afghan codes of honor. Most importantly, she helped establish relationships with village leaders who began providing intelligence about Taliban movements and weapon caches. But it was during a routine patrol in the Spera district that Sarah's hidden skills would first be revealed. The patrol consisted of 12 soldiers from Bravo Company, led by Captain James Wilson, a young officer who had been in Afghanistan for only 6 weeks. Their mission was to inspect a reported improvised explosive device along Highway 1, the main supply route connecting coast to Gardez. The patrol left Chapman at dawn on October 15th, traveling in 4 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. Sarah rode in the second vehicle with Captain Wilson and his radio operator, Specialist Danny Park. The reported IED location was approximately 15 kilometers south of the base, in an area that had seen increased Taliban activity during the previous month. As they approached the suspected IED location, Captain Wilson ordered the vehicles to stop 300 meters away. Standard protocol required explosive ordnance disposal specialists to investigate any suspected bombs, but EOD teams were scarce, and this patrol was operating without dedicated bomb disposal support. Instead, they had Sergeant First Class Kevin Martinez, a combat engineer with basic EOD training. While Sergeant Martinez prepared his equipment to investigate the suspected device, Sarah noticed movement in a compound approximately 600 meters to the east. Through her binoculars, she could see at least 3 men moving between buildings, carrying what appeared to be weapons. One of the men was setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun position on the roof of the tallest building. Sarah immediately reported her observation to Captain Wilson, who studied the compound through his own optics. The captain faced a difficult decision. If he called for backup, it would take at least 30 minutes for additional forces to arrive, during which time the suspected IED could be remotely detonated, killing his entire patrol. If he ordered his men to assault the compound, they would be exposed to machine gun fire across 600 meters of open terrain. Captain Wilson decided to try a different approach. He ordered his sniper team, led by Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, to establish an overwatch position that could provide covering fire if the situation escalated. Staff Sergeant Chen was an experienced marksman who had completed the Army's sniper school at Fort Benning, but he had never engaged targets at distances greater than 400 meters in combat situations. As Staff Sergeant Chen set up his M24 sniper weapon system, Sarah watched the compound through her binoculars. She could see that the Taliban fighters were preparing for an ambush. The machine gun position was being reinforced with sandbags, and additional fighters were moving into position behind walls and buildings. Most concerning was a fighter who appeared to be setting up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Sarah had never been in a combat situation, but her grandfather's training had included lessons about reading battlefield conditions and understanding tactical situations. She recognized that the American patrol was walking into a carefully planned ambush. The suspected IED was likely a decoy, designed to stop the patrol in the exact position where Taliban fighters could inflict maximum casualties. When she shared her assessment with Captain Wilson, the young officer realized he was facing a situation far more complex than his training had prepared him for. The Taliban fighters had chosen their position carefully, taking advantage of terrain that provided them with clear fields of fire while offering multiple escape routes. A direct assault would result in heavy American casualties, but remaining in their current position meant eventually facing coordinated fire from multiple weapon systems. Staff Sergeant Chen confirmed Sarah's assessment after studying the compound through his scope. He could see at least 5 enemy fighters, armed with AK-47 assault rifles, a heavy machine gun, and the RPG launcher that Sarah had identified. The range was approximately 620 meters, near the maximum effective range of his M24 rifle, and the wind conditions were challenging. Captain Wilson requested immediate air support, but was informed that no aircraft were available for at least 45 minutes. He considered calling for artillery support, but the compound was located near civilian structures, making indirect fire problematic. The captain was running out of options when Sarah made an unexpected offer. She told Captain Wilson that she might be able to help with the sniper problem. When the captain asked what she meant, Sarah explained her background with long-range shooting. Captain Wilson was initially incredulous. Military snipers train for months to develop the skills necessary for combat shooting, and the idea that a civilian translator could contribute meaningfully to a tactical situation seemed impossible. However, Staff Sergeant Chen had been listening to the conversation, and he asked Sarah specific questions about her shooting experience. When she mentioned her grandfather's training and her ability to hit targets at 800 yards, the sergeant became more interested. He had served with military snipers who had less practical experience than Sarah was describing. The situation deteriorated when Taliban fighters began moving into additional positions around the compound. Sarah could see through her binoculars that they were being surrounded, with enemy fighters establishing positions that would create a deadly crossfire. The Americans had perhaps 10 minutes before the ambush would be triggered. Staff Sergeant Chen made a decision that would change everything. He asked Sarah if she was confident in her ability to engage targets at 600 meters. When she said yes, he offered to let her use his M24 rifle. Captain Wilson initially objected, pointing out that civilian contractors were not authorized to use military weapons in combat situations. Staff Sergeant Chen responded that they were about to die if something didn't change immediately. Sarah had never fired an M24 rifle before, but the weapon was similar to the civilian hunting rifle she had used in Montana. Staff Sergeant Chen quickly explained the scope's adjustments and the rifle's characteristics. The M24 fired 7.62 mm NATO ammunition, which was more powerful than the .270 Winchester cartridges she was accustomed to, but the ballistic principles were identical. As Sarah examined the rifle, she felt the familiar calm that her grandfather had taught her to cultivate before taking difficult shots. Her breathing slowed, her hands steadied, and she began calculating the factors that would affect bullet trajectory. The wind was blowing from the southwest at approximately 8 miles per hour, which would push bullets to the right. The target was slightly uphill, which would cause bullets to impact low if she didn't compensate properly. Through the scope, Sarah could see the Taliban fighter manning the heavy machine gun position. He was approximately 25 years old, wearing a traditional payhole hat and a brown vest over his white shirt. She could see his face clearly, which made what she was about to do feel more real than any hunting trip in Montana. This man was trying to kill American soldiers, and she was about to try to kill him first. Staff Sergeant Chen lay beside Sarah, spotting through his own binoculars and providing corrections for wind and range. Captain Wilson monitored radio communications, knowing that his career would likely end regardless of how this situation resolved. Allowing a civilian contractor to engage in combat was a violation of numerous military regulations, but allowing his soldiers to die because he followed regulations would be worse. Sarah chambered a round in the M24 rifle and settled into a comfortable shooting position behind a small wall of sandbags. Through the scope, she could see the machine gunner clearly. He was scanning the American positions, apparently waiting for a signal to begin firing. She placed the crosshairs slightly to the left of his chest, compensating for wind drift, and elevated the point of aim to account for bullet drop over 600 meters. Her grandfather had taught her that the moment before firing was the most important part of any shot. Breathing had to be controlled, muscle tension eliminated, and mental focus absolute. Sarah took 3 deep breaths, exhaled halfway, and held her breath. She squeezed the trigger slowly, steadily increasing pressure until the rifle fired. The shot felt perfect. Sarah knew immediately that she had hit her target, even before Staff Sergeant Chen confirmed the kill through his binoculars. The machine gunner dropped behind his weapon, and other Taliban fighters immediately began scrambling for cover. Sarah had just fired her first shot in combat, and she had killed a man who was preparing to kill American soldiers. But the engagement was far from over. The remaining Taliban fighters quickly recovered from their surprise and began firing at the American positions. AK-47 bullets snapped overhead, and the RPG gunner launched a rocket that exploded 50 meters short of the American vehicles. Captain Wilson realized that his patrol was still in serious danger, and that Sarah's first shot had only eliminated one of several threats. Staff Sergeant Chen spotted the RPG gunner moving to a new position and called out the target to Sarah. The fighter was approximately 580 meters away, partially concealed behind a mud brick wall. Only his head and shoulders were visible as he prepared to fire another rocket. This would be a much more difficult shot than the first, requiring precise placement to hit such a small target. Sarah chambered another round and adjusted her position. Through the scope, she could see the RPG gunner clearly. He was older than the machine gunner, probably in his 40s, with a grey beard and intense eyes. He was focused on loading another rocket into his launcher, unaware that he was being targeted. Sarah placed the crosshairs on the center of his visible torso and began her breathing sequence. The second shot was as accurate as the first. The RPG gunner collapsed immediately, his weapon falling into the courtyard below his position. 2 Taliban fighters were now dead, and the remaining fighters began to panic. Some attempted to flee toward the mountains, while others continued firing from concealed positions. Captain Wilson called for his soldiers to advance toward the compound, using Sarah's suppressive fire to cover their movement. She continued to engage targets as they presented themselves, methodically eliminating Taliban fighters who exposed themselves long enough for her to acquire clear shots. Her third shot killed a fighter armed with an AK-47 who was attempting to flank the advancing Americans. Her fourth shot wounded another fighter who was trying to escape through a window. Within 15 minutes, the engagement was over. The surviving Taliban fighters had either fled or been killed by American ground forces who successfully assaulted the compound. Sarah had fired 7 shots and achieved 6 hits, including 4 confirmed kills. For a civilian contractor who had never been in combat before, her performance was extraordinary. As the patrol prepared to return to forward-pacing Base Chapman, Staff Sergeant Chen approached Sarah with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. He had served with military snipers throughout his career, and he had never seen shooting as precise and controlled as what Sarah had just demonstrated. Her ability to engage multiple targets at long range while under fire exceeded the performance of most trained military marksmen. Captain Wilson faced the difficult task of writing an after-action report that would explain how a civilian contractor had been allowed to engage in direct combat with enemy forces. Military regulations were explicit about the role of civilian contractors, and allowing Sarah to use military weapons in combat was a clear violation of established policy. However, Sarah's actions had undoubtedly saved American lives, and the tactical situation had required immediate action. The patrol's return to Chapman marked the beginning of Sarah's transformation from translator to sniper. Word of her performance spread quickly through the base, and within days, senior commanders were asking questions about the civilian contractor who had demonstrated extraordinary marksmanship skills. Sarah had crossed a line that she could never uncross, but her actions had revealed abilities that would soon make her invaluable to American forces operating in eastern Afghanistan. That evening, as Sarah cleaned the M24 rifle before returning it to Staff Sergeant Chen, she reflected on what had happened. She had killed 4 men, and the weight of those actions was beginning to settle in her mind. However, she also knew that her shots had prevented Taliban fighters from killing American soldiers, and that knowledge helped her cope with the moral complexity of her situation. Her grandfather had always told her that shooting was a responsibility as much as a skill. In Montana, that responsibility meant ensuring clean kills on game animals and never taking shots beyond her ability. In Afghanistan, that responsibility meant using her skills to protect the soldiers who depended on her language abilities and cultural knowledge. Sarah was beginning to understand that her role in this war was going to be much more complicated than she had ever imagined. Within 48 hours of the engagement in Spera District, Sarah Martinez's actions had reached the attention of every senior commander in Regional Command East. The after-action reports filed by Captain Wilson and Staff Sergeant Chen described the tactical situation and Sarah's response in clinical military language. But the story that spread through informal channels among soldiers was far more dramatic. Soldiers who had served multiple deployments in Afghanistan talked about the civilian contractor who could outshoot trained military snipers. Non-commissioned officers who had never seen anything like Sarah's performance began requesting her presence on their patrols. Most importantly, intelligence analysts began studying the tactical implications of having a marksman with Sarah's capabilities available for operations in contested areas. Colonel David Richardson, who commanded the 4th Brigade combat team responsible for Coast and Paktia provinces, found himself in an unprecedented situation. Military doctrine had no provisions for civilian contractors engaging in direct combat, but the tactical reality in eastern Afghanistan required flexibility that doctrine had never anticipated. Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters were increasingly using long-range weapons to attack American convoys and outposts, and conventional military responses were proving inadequate. The morning after Sarah's engagement, Colonel Richardson requested a private meeting with her at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Sarah arrived at the colonel's office expecting to be disciplined for violating contractor guidelines. Instead, she found herself facing a senior officer who was genuinely interested in understanding her background and capabilities. Colonel Richardson had served 3 previous deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he had worked with some of the military's most skilled snipers. He understood the technical and psychological demands of long-range shooting, and he recognized that Sarah's performance indicated abilities that were extremely rare even among trained professionals. Her accuracy under pressure, combined with her language skills and cultural knowledge, represented a unique asset that could significantly impact operations in his area of responsibility. During their conversation, Sarah described her training with her grandfather in Montana, emphasizing that her skills had been developed for hunting rather than combat. She explained that while she was confident in her marksmanship abilities, she had never intended to become involved in direct military action. Colonel Richardson listened carefully, asking detailed questions about her shooting experience and her comfort level with engaging human targets. Sarah admitted that killing Taliban fighters had been emotionally difficult, but she emphasized that her primary concern was protecting American soldiers. She had seen too many young Americans killed or wounded by Taliban snipers and ambush attacks, and she believed that her skills could help reduce those casualties. Her grandfather had taught her that every shot carried moral responsibility, and she felt responsible for using her abilities to protect the soldiers who depended on her language services. Colonel Richardson faced a complex decision. Military regulations prohibited civilian contractors from engaging in combat operations, but those same regulations had been written before the unconventional warfare challenges of Afghanistan and Iraq. Sarah's language skills made her invaluable as a translator and cultural advisor, but her marksmanship abilities could address specific tactical problems that conventional military assets couldn't solve. The colonel decided to consult with his legal advisors and senior staff before making any decisions about Sarah's future role. However, he also made it clear that her actions in Spera District had been heroic and had saved American lives. He assured Sarah that she would not face disciplinary action for her conduct during the engagement, and he encouraged her to continue participating in patrol operations as a translator. That same day, Staff Sergeant Chen approached Sarah with a request that would further complicate her situation. His sniper team had been assigned to provide overwatch for a convoy operation along Highway 1, and he wanted Sarah to accompany them as an observer. Chen had been impressed by Sarah's performance and believed that she could learn valuable lessons about military sniper tactics that would improve her effectiveness in future situations. Sarah agreed to accompany the sniper team, understanding that her role would be limited to observation and translation services. However, she also knew that her presence with the team would inevitably lead to situations where her marksmanship skills might be needed. The line between civilian contractor and combatant was becoming increasingly blurred, but Sarah felt obligated to continue supporting American operations. The convoy operation took place 3 days later, involving 24 vehicles carrying supplies from Forward Operating Base Chapman to Combat Outpost Marga, located near the Pakistan border. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban fighters were planning to ambush the convoy somewhere along the 40-kilometer route, but the specific location and timing of the planned attack remained unknown. Staff Sergeant Chen's sniper team established an overwatch position on a ridgeline approximately 800 meters from the highway, providing coverage for the most dangerous portion of the convoy route. The team consisted of Chen as the primary shooter, Corporal Michael Torres as the spotter, and Sarah as an observer and translator. Their mission was to identify and engage any threats to the convoy while remaining concealed from enemy observation. The convoy began its movement at dawn, with Sarah monitoring radio communications and translating intercepted Taliban radio transmissions. Her language skills proved immediately valuable, as she was able to identify Taliban spotters who were reporting the convoy's progress to attack teams positioned along the route. This intelligence allowed convoy commanders to adjust their route and timing to avoid planned ambush locations. However, the Taliban fighters adapted quickly to the convoy's route changes, repositioning their forces to establish a new ambush position approximately 15 kilometers from Chapman. Sarah intercepted radio communications indicating that a large Taliban force, estimated at more than 30 fighters, was preparing to attack the convoy with heavy weapons including recoilless rifles and machine guns. Staff Sergeant Chen's team was repositioned to provide overwatch for the new threat area, but their movement required crossing exposed terrain that would make them vulnerable to enemy observation. Sarah's cultural knowledge proved crucial during this movement, as she was able to identify local villagers who could provide information about Taliban positions and help the sniper team avoid enemy patrols. When the convoy reached the new ambush site, Taliban fighters initiated their attack with devastating effectiveness. Recoilless rifle rounds destroyed the lead vehicle, killing 3 American soldiers instantly and wounding 5 others. Heavy machine gun fire raked the convoy, forcing soldiers to take cover behind vehicles and roadside barriers. The Americans found themselves trapped in a killing zone with limited options for escape or counterattack. From their overwatch position, Staff Sergeant Chen's team could see the entire ambush developing. Taliban fighters were positioned in 3 separate locations, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered the entire convoy. Chen identified the recoilless rifle team as the primary threat, but the range was approximately 900 meters, near the maximum effective range of his M24 rifle. Chen engaged the recoilless rifle team with 2 shots, but both rounds impacted short of the target due to the extreme range and difficult wind conditions. The Taliban gunners continued firing, destroying a second convoy vehicle and wounding additional American soldiers. Sarah could see through her binoculars that the situation was deteriorating rapidly, and that conventional military responses were proving inadequate. Without being asked, Sarah positioned herself behind Chen's rifle and studied the target through the scope. The recoilless rifle team consisted of 3 Taliban fighters operating from a position behind a low stone wall. The range was challenging, but Sarah had successfully engaged targets at similar distances during hunting trips in Montana. More importantly, she could see that the Taliban gunners were becoming overconfident, exposing themselves more freely as they continued their attack. Sarah asked Chen for permission to engage the target, explaining that she believed she could make shots that were beyond his current capability due to the extreme range and wind conditions. Chen was initially reluctant to allow a civilian contractor to engage in combat, but the tactical situation was desperate. and Sarah's demonstrated abilities made her proposal tactically sound. Chen moved aside and allowed Sarah to take control of the M24 rifle. She quickly adjusted the scope for the longer range and studied wind conditions by observing dust and vegetation movement. The wind was gusting unpredictably, making precise shots extremely difficult, but Sarah had learned to read wind patterns from her grandfather's training in the mountains of Montana. Sarah's first shot at 900 meters was a perfect hit, killing the Taliban gunner who was loading the recoilless rifle. Her second shot wounded the assistant gunner, effectively eliminating the weapon system that posed the greatest threat to the convoy. The remaining Taliban fighter attempted to continue operating the recoilless rifle, but Sarah's third shot killed him before he could fire another round. With the recoilless rifle eliminated, the tactical balance of the engagement shifted dramatically. Convoy security forces were able to maneuver against the remaining Taliban positions, using supporting fire from Staff Sergeant Chen's team to suppress enemy resistance. Sarah continued to engage targets of opportunity, killing 3 additional Taliban fighters and wounding several others as they attempted to escape. The engagement lasted approximately 45 minutes, during which Sarah fired 12 rounds and achieved 9 hits, including 6 confirmed kills. Her shooting performance at ranges exceeding 800 meters was extraordinary, even by the standards of the military's most elite snipers. Most significantly, her elimination of the recoilless rifle team had prevented additional American casualties and allowed the convoy to complete its mission. As the Taliban fighters withdrew from their positions, Sarah reflected on what had just occurred. She had now killed 10 enemy fighters in 2 separate engagements, and her actions had directly saved the lives of numerous American soldiers. However, she had also crossed additional lines regarding her role as a civilian contractor, and she understood that her situation was becoming increasingly complicated from both legal and practical perspectives. Staff Sergeant Chen was amazed by Sarah's performance, particularly her ability to engage targets accurately at ranges that challenged even experienced military snipers. He recognized that Sarah possessed natural abilities that were extremely rare, combined with training that was superior to what most military marksmen received. Chen began to believe that Sarah's skills were too valuable to waste on translation duties alone. That evening, Chen approached his commanding officer, Captain Wilson, with a proposal that would formalize Sarah's role as a sniper. Chen argued that Sarah's demonstrated abilities, combined with her language skills and cultural knowledge, made her uniquely qualified for special operations in eastern Afghanistan. He proposed that Sarah be attached to his sniper team on a permanent basis, providing both marksmanship support and translation services for high-priority missions. Captain Wilson was intrigued by Chen's proposal, but he also understood the regulatory and legal complications that would result from formally recognizing a civilian contractor as a combat operative. Military doctrine and civilian contractor guidelines were explicit about the roles and limitations of non-military personnel in combat zones, and Wilson had already pushed those boundaries by allowing Sarah to engage in combat during previous operations. However, Wilson also recognized that Sarah's abilities could significantly impact the effectiveness of his unit's operations. Taliban and al-Qaeda snipers had been increasingly successful in targeting American forces, and conventional military responses had proven inadequate. Sarah's demonstrated ability to engage enemy snipers at extreme ranges could provide solutions to tactical problems that his unit couldn't solve with standard military assets. Wilson decided to forward Chen's proposal to Colonel Richardson, along with detailed after-action reports documenting Sarah's performance during both recent engagements. Wilson recommended that Sarah be given additional training and equipment that would allow her to maximize her effectiveness while maintaining her official status as a civilian contractor. He also recommended that legal advisors review the implications of Sarah's expanded role to ensure that operations remained within acceptable legal boundaries. Colonel Richardson received Wilson's report while he was preparing for a visit from Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, who commanded all Special Operations Forces in Regional Command East. General Hayes had been briefed about Sarah's actions and was personally interested in meeting the civilian contractor who had demonstrated such extraordinary capabilities. The general's visit would provide an opportunity to discuss Sarah's future role and to obtain guidance from higher headquarters about the legal and practical implications of her situation. Sarah spent the evening cleaning and maintaining the M24 rifle that had become her primary weapon. She had requisitioned additional ammunition and had begun practicing with the weapon system to improve her familiarity with its characteristics. Staff Sergeant Chen had provided her with advanced instruction about scope adjustments, ballistic calculations, and target engagement techniques that would improve her effectiveness in future operations. As Sarah prepared for sleep in her quarters at Forward Operating Base Chapman, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed during the past week. She had arrived in Afghanistan as a translator, expecting to spend her deployment facilitating communication between American soldiers and Afghan civilians. Instead, she had become a sniper whose actions were saving American lives and influencing the outcome of combat operations. Her grandfather had always told her that exceptional abilities came with exceptional responsibilities. In Montana, that responsibility had meant ensuring ethical hunting practices and conservation of wildlife resources. In Afghanistan, that responsibility meant using her skills to protect American soldiers and accomplish military objectives that conventional forces couldn't achieve. Sarah understood that her situation was unprecedented and potentially problematic from regulatory and legal perspectives. However, she also understood that her abilities were too valuable to ignore, and that American soldiers were depending on her skills for their survival. She was prepared to accept whatever consequences might result from her expanded role, as long as she could continue protecting the young Americans who were fighting and dying in Afghanistan's remote mountains and valleys. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities for Sarah to prove her value as both a translator. Her reputation was spreading throughout the military command structure, and senior officers were beginning to recognize that her unique combination of skills represented a significant tactical asset. However, they were also beginning to understand that Sarah's situation raised questions about military doctrine, contractor regulations, and the evolving nature of warfare in the 21st century. Brigadier General Patricia Hayes arrived at Forward Operating Base Chapman on a cold November morning, accompanied by a team of Special Operations advisors who had traveled from Bagram Airfield specifically to evaluate Sarah Martinez's unique situation. General Hayes commanded Joint Special Operations Command Afghanistan, overseeing the most sensitive and dangerous missions conducted by American forces in the region. Her interest in Sarah represented recognition that civilian contractors with specialized skills were becoming increasingly valuable assets in unconventional warfare environments. General Hayes had served in special operations for more than 20 years, including multiple deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations around the world. She understood that effective counterinsurgency operations required flexibility and innovation that traditional military doctrine often couldn't accommodate. Her experience with unconventional warfare had taught her to recognize and utilize exceptional capabilities regardless of their source or their conformity to established regulations. Sarah's briefing with General Hayes took place in a secure conference room at Chapman, with Colonel Richardson and other senior officers present. The general asked detailed questions about Sarah's background, training, and combat experience, focusing particularly on her psychological response to engaging human targets. General Hayes had worked with numerous military snipers throughout her career, and she understood that successful long-range shooting required mental characteristics that were as important as technical skills. During the briefing, Sarah described her grandfather's training methods and her development as a marksman in Montana's challenging mountain environment. She explained that her grandfather had emphasized ethical hunting practices and respect for life, lessons that had helped her cope with the moral complexities of combat shooting. Sarah admitted that killing Taliban fighters had been emotionally difficult, but she emphasized that her primary motivation was protecting American soldiers who depended on her support. General Hayes was particularly interested in Sarah's cultural knowledge and language abilities, recognizing that her combination of combat skills and intelligence capabilities made her uniquely valuable for special operations missions. Traditional military snipers were trained to engage targets and provide overwatch support, but they typically lacked the language skills and cultural understanding necessary for complex intelligence operations in Afghan tribal areas. The general discussed several classified missions that had failed because American forces lacked adequate intelligence about local conditions and tribal relationships. Sarah's ability to communicate directly with tribal leaders and understand cultural nuances could provide crucial advantages for future operations, particularly when combined with her demonstrated marksmanship abilities. General Hayes began to envision Sarah's role in operations that conventional military assets couldn't accomplish. However, General Hayes also understood the legal and regulatory challenges associated with Sarah's expanded role. Civilian contractors were prohibited from engaging in direct combat operations, and allowing Sarah to continue serving as a sniper would require creative interpretation of existing regulations. The general consulted with her legal advisors about potential solutions that would allow Sarah to continue contributing to military operations while maintaining legal compliance. The legal team proposed classifying Sarah as a technical advisor rather than a combatant, emphasizing her intelligence and translation capabilities while acknowledging her defensive use of weapons when necessary to protect American forces. This classification would allow Sarah to participate in dangerous missions while maintaining her civilian contractor status. provided that her primary role remained intelligence gathering and cultural liaison rather than direct combat. General Hayes approved this solution and authorized Sarah's assignment to a classified special operations unit that conducted intelligence gathering missions in remote areas of eastern Afghanistan. The unit, designated Task Force Lightning, specialized in operations that required deep cultural knowledge and extended presence in contested tribal areas. Sarah's language skills and marksmanship abilities made her ideally suited for Task Force Lightning's mission requirements. Task Force Lightning was commanded by Major Lucas Thompson, a Green Beret officer who had conducted more than 40 classified missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. Major Thompson had extensive experience working with local assets and tribal leaders, and he immediately recognized the value that Sarah could bring to his operations. Her ability to communicate directly with tribal leaders could provide intelligence opportunities that conventional military units couldn't access. Major Thompson's team consisted of 12 Special Forces soldiers, each with specialized skills in communications, weapons, medical support, and intelligence analysis. The team had been operating in Paktika province for 6 months, establishing relationships with tribal leaders and gathering intelligence about Taliban and Al-Qaeda activities along the Pakistan border. Their missions typically involved extended stays in remote villages, where they worked to build trust with local populations and identify enemy networks. Sarah's first mission with Task Force Lightning began in late November 2011, when the team was tasked with investigating reports of a major Taliban training facility in the mountains near Wazakwa. Intelligence indicated that more than 100 Taliban fighters were receiving advanced weapons training at the facility, including instruction in the use of improvised explosive devices and suicide bombing techniques. However, the facility's exact location remained unknown, and previous attempts to locate it had failed. The mission required Task Force Lightning to establish a temporary base in the village of Mata Khan, approximately 20 kilometers from the suspected training facility. The village was controlled by a tribal leader named Haji Abdul Rahman, who had previously cooperated with American forces but had recently become unresponsive to requests for information and assistance. Major Thompson suspected that Rahman was being pressured or threatened by Taliban forces, but confirming this suspicion required direct communication with the tribal leader. Sarah's role in the mission was to establish contact with Haji Rahman and assess his willingness to provide information about Taliban activities in the area. Her cultural knowledge and language skills were essential for this task, as Rahman spoke only Pashto and adhered to traditional Afghan customs that required careful protocol in dealing with outsiders. However, Sarah's marksmanship abilities would also be crucial if the mission encountered armed resistance from Taliban forces. Task Force Lightning inserted into the Mata Khan area by helicopter during a moonless night, establishing their temporary base in abandoned buildings on the outskirts of the village. The team's arrival was undetected by local residents, allowing them to begin surveillance operations immediately. Sarah used her binoculars and scope to study the village layout and identify key buildings and potential threats. The village consisted of approximately 30 compounds housing about 200 residents, mostly members of the Wazir tribe who had lived in the area for generations. Sarah could see that the village showed signs of recent Taliban presence, including defensive positions and communication equipment that indicated ongoing military activity. However, she also observed that local residents appeared nervous and subdued, suggesting that they were being coerced rather than willingly cooperating with Taliban forces. Major Thompson decided to approach Haji Rahman directly, using Sarah as his translator and cultural advisor. The meeting was arranged through traditional Afghan protocols, with Sarah serving as an intermediary who could communicate the Americans' peaceful intentions while demonstrating respect for local customs. The meeting location was Rahman's compound in the center of the village, which provided minimal security but showed appropriate respect for the tribal leader's status. Sarah's first face-to-face meeting with Haji Rahman revealed the complexity of the situation in Mata Khan. Rahman was an elderly man in his 70s who had served as the village leader for more than 30 years. He was intelligent and perceptive, and he immediately understood that Sarah's presence with American forces represented opportunities and dangers that could affect his entire tribe's survival. Through Sarah's translation, Rahman explained that Taliban forces had established a major presence in the area during the previous 2 months. More than 50 Taliban fighters were operating from positions in the mountains surrounding Mata Khan, and they had threatened to kill Rahman's family if he provided any assistance to American forces. The tribal leader was trapped between competing pressures from Taliban forces and American military units, both of which demanded his cooperation while threatening severe consequences for non-compliance. Rahman's situation was further complicated by the presence of foreign fighters among the Taliban forces. Sarah learned that Arab and Pakistani militants were providing advanced training to local Taliban recruits, teaching them sophisticated bomb-making techniques and coordinated attack methods. These foreign fighters were based at the training facility that Task Force Lightning had been assigned to locate, and their presence indicated that the facility was more significant than intelligence reports had suggested. Sarah spent several hours with Rahman, gradually building trust and gathering detailed information about Taliban activities in the area. Her cultural knowledge was crucial during these conversations, as she understood the subtle protocols and indirect communication methods that Rahman used to convey sensitive information without explicitly betraying Taliban forces. Sarah recognized that Rahman wanted to help American forces, but needed assurance that his cooperation wouldn't result in retaliation against his tribe. Major Thompson authorized Sarah to provide Rahman with a satellite communication device that would allow him to contact American forces if Taliban fighters threatened his village. This gesture demonstrated American commitment to protecting tribal leaders who provided assistance, and it helped convince Rahman to share more detailed information about the Taliban training facility's location. Rahman revealed that the training facility was located in a valley approximately 15 km northeast of Matakan, accessible only through a narrow mountain pass that was heavily guarded by Taliban sentries. The facility consisted of several buildings and training areas, where foreign instructors taught advanced combat techniques to local recruits. Most importantly, Rahman indicated that a high-value Taliban commander named Mullah Omar Haqqani was based at the facility and was planning major attacks against American forces throughout eastern Afghanistan. This intelligence was extremely valuable to Task Force Lightning's mission, but it also created new complications for the team's operations. The training facility was more heavily defended than expected, and the presence of Mullah Haqqani made it a priority target for special operations forces. However, approaching the facility would require crossing terrain that provided Taliban forces with significant tactical advantages. Major Thompson decided to conduct a reconnaissance mission to confirm Rahan's intelligence and develop a detailed plan for attacking the training facility. Sarah would accompany the reconnaissance team as both a translator and a sniper, providing language support for any encounters with local residents, while also serving as the team's primary marksman for long-range engagement. The reconnaissance mission began before dawn the following day, with Sarah and 4 Special Forces soldiers moving through mountainous terrain toward the Taliban training facility. The team traveled on foot, using night vision equipment and GPS navigation to avoid Taliban patrols and observation posts. Sarah carried a suppressed M24 rifle and additional ammunition, prepared to engage threats that might compromise the mission. As the team approached the training facility, Sarah could hear voices speaking Arabic and Urdu in addition to Pashto, confirming Rahan's reports about foreign fighters. Through her scope, she observed a complex of buildings and training areas that were much larger than intelligence reports had indicated. The facility appeared capable of training hundreds of fighters simultaneously, and it was clearly receiving significant resources and support from Taliban leadership. Sarah counted more than 40 Taliban fighters visible around the training facility, including sentries, instructors, and students participating in various training exercises. She observed weapons training, explosive device construction, and tactical movement exercises that indicated sophisticated military instruction. Most concerning was a group of fighters practicing coordinated assault techniques against mock American defensive positions. The reconnaissance team spent 6 hours observing the training facility, gathering intelligence that would be used to plan a major raid by coalition forces. Sarah's language skills allowed the team to intercept Taliban radio communications, providing valuable information about the facility's command structure and defensive capabilities. Her marksmanship skills were not required during the reconnaissance mission, but her presence provided confidence that the team could handle unexpected encounters with enemy forces. However, as the team prepared to withdraw from their observation position, Sarah noticed movement that indicated they had been detected by Taliban sentries. Through her scope, she could see 2 Taliban fighters moving toward the team's position, apparently conducting a patrol that had identified signs of American presence. The fighters were approximately 400 meters away and were armed with AK-47 rifles and radio equipment. Major Thompson faced a difficult decision. If the Taliban sentries discovered the reconnaissance team, they would alert the training facility and potentially compromise the planned raid. However, engaging the sentries would also reveal American presence in the area and might trigger a larger response from Taliban forces. Thompson decided that eliminating the sentries was necessary to protect both the reconnaissance team and the success of future operations. Sarah positioned herself for long-range shots against both Taliban sentries, understanding that she would need to eliminate both targets quickly to prevent either fighter from using radio equipment to alert the training facility. The range was approximately 400 meters, which was well within her capability, but she would need to engage both targets in rapid succession to prevent tactical compromise. Sarah's first shot killed the lead Taliban sentry instantly, dropping him behind a large boulder where his body would not be immediately visible to other fighters. Her second shot, fired less than 10 seconds later, killed the second sentry before he could use his radio equipment. Both shots were precisely placed and achieved immediate incapacitation, preventing any communication with the training facility. The reconnaissance team successfully withdrew from the area without further contact with enemy forces. Sarah's elimination of the Taliban sentries had prevented compromise of the mission and protected intelligence that would be crucial for planning future operations against the training facility. Her shooting performance under pressure continued to demonstrate abilities that exceeded those of most military snipers. Task Force Lightning's reconnaissance mission provided intelligence that led to a major coalition raid against the Taliban training facility 2 weeks later. The raid successfully destroyed the facility and captured several high-value targets, including foreign fighters who provided valuable information about international terrorist networks operating in Afghanistan. Sarah's contribution to the mission's success demonstrated her value as both an intelligence asset and a combat operative. Major Thompson submitted detailed reports about Sarah's performance, emphasizing her unique combination of cultural knowledge, language skills, and marksmanship abilities. He recommended that Sarah be given additional training and equipment that would maximize her effectiveness for future special operations missions. Most importantly, he recommended that Sarah's role be formalized in a way that would allow other special operations units to utilize her capabilities. General Hayes reviewed Thompson's reports and authorized Sarah's permanent assignment to special operations units operating in eastern Afghanistan. This assignment represented unprecedented recognition of a civilian contractor's combat capabilities, and it established precedents that would influence how military forces utilize specialized civilian personnel in future conflicts. Sarah's transformation from translator to special operations asset was now complete. She had proven her value in some of the most dangerous and demanding missions conducted by American forces in Afghanistan, and her reputation was spreading throughout the special operations community. However, her most challenging missions still lay ahead, including operations that would bring her to the attention of the most secretive and elite units in the American military. In December 2011, Sarah Martinez received orders that would place her at the center of the most classified and dangerous operations conducted by American forces in Afghanistan. She was summoned to a briefing at Bagram Airfield, where she would meet representatives from Joint Special Operations Command's most elite units. These units operated under such secrecy that even their existence was rarely acknowledged by official military channels. The briefing took place in a windowless room deep within Bagram's most secure facility, attended by officers whose names and unit designations remained classified even during the meeting. Sarah understood that she was being considered for operations that went far beyond the Special Forces missions she had conducted with Task Force Lightning. The men and women in this room represented America's most secretive military capabilities, and their interest in her abilities indicated that her role was about to expand dramatically. Commander James Mackenzie, a Navy SEAL officer whose background remained classified, led the briefing. Mackenzie had served with SEAL Team 6 and other special mission units for more than 15 years, conducting operations that ranged from counter-terrorism raids to strategic reconnaissance missions in denied areas. His presence at Sarah's briefing indicated that Navy Special Operations Forces were interested in utilizing her unique capabilities for maritime and coastal operations. Mackenzie explained that intelligence agencies had identified several high-value targets operating from locations along Afghanistan's border with Pakistan. These targets included senior al-Qaeda operatives and Taliban commanders who were coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout eastern Afghanistan. However, the targets' locations and security arrangements made conventional military approaches extremely difficult or impossible. The targets were operating from compounds that were protected by sophisticated security systems and defended by highly trained fighters. Most importantly, the compounds were located in areas where American forces had limited intelligence about local conditions, tribal relationships, and potential escape routes. Traditional special operations approaches had proven inadequate for these specific targets, requiring new methods that could combine stealth, precision, and deep cultural knowledge. Sarah's demonstrated abilities in marksmanship, intelligence gathering, and cultural liaison made her uniquely qualified for these challenging missions. Her civilian contractor status also provided operational advantages, as her presence in certain areas would attract less attention than uniformed military personnel. Commander Mackenzie proposed that Sarah be trained and equipped to support the most sensitive special operations missions conducted by American forces. The training program that Mackenzie outlined would prepare Sarah for operations that were significantly more demanding than anything she had previously experienced. She would receive instruction in advanced marksmanship techniques, stealth movement, communications procedures, and emergency medical skills. Most importantly, she would be briefed on operational security procedures that were essential for missions where discovery could result in international diplomatic crises. Sarah accepted the assignment, understanding that her role was evolving beyond anything that civilian contractors had traditionally been asked to perform. However, she also understood that American forces were facing threats that required unconventional solutions, and that her unique combination of abilities could contribute to operations that conventional military units couldn't accomplish. Sarah's advanced training began at a classified facility near Kabul, where she worked with instructors from various special operations units. The training focused on skills that would be essential for missions in denied areas, including advanced camouflage techniques, silent movement methods, and long-range shooting under extreme conditions. Sarah's instructors were impressed by her natural abilities and her rapid absorption of complex tactical concepts. The marksmanship portion of Sarah's training was conducted by Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Santos, a Navy SEAL sniper with more than 20 years of special operations experience. Santos had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and other classified locations, and he immediately recognized that Sarah's shooting abilities exceeded those of most military professionals. Her natural talent, combined with her grandfather's training, had produced capabilities that were extremely rare even among elite military units. Santos provided Sarah with advanced instruction in extreme long-range shooting, focusing on engagements beyond 1,000 meters under challenging environmental conditions. Sarah learned to calculate ballistic solutions for shots at ranges that most snipers considered impossible, taking into account factors like altitude, temperature, humidity, and complex wind patterns. Her performance during training exercises consistently exceeded the standards expected of military special operations personnel. Most importantly, Santos taught Sarah how to operate independently for extended periods in hostile territory. Traditional military snipers usually operated with support teams that provided security, communications, and logistical support. However, Sarah's missions would often require her to work alone or with minimal support, making self-sufficiency essential for both mission success and personal survival. Sarah also received training in advanced reconnaissance techniques from a CIA operative whose name and background remained classified. This training focused on intelligence-gathering methods that could be employed by a single operator in denied areas, including photography of sensitive installations, electronic surveillance of communications, and assessment of enemy capabilities and intentions. Sarah learned to use sophisticated equipment that could gather intelligence while remaining undetected by enemy security forces. The training program concluded with a realistic exercise that tested all of Sarah's newly acquired skills. She was given a mission to locate and photograph a simulated enemy facility, while remaining undetected for 72 hours in mountainous terrain. The exercise included hostile forces actively searching for her, weather conditions that challenged equipment and endurance, and multiple simulated equipment failures that required improvised solutions. Sarah successfully completed the exercise, demonstrating mastery of skills that qualified her for the most demanding special operations missions. Her instructors noted that her performance exceeded the standards achieved by most male special operations personnel, and that her abilities were particularly suited for missions requiring stealth and precision rather than direct assault capabilities. Upon completion of her training, Sarah received her first classified mission assignment. She would be deployed with a small SEAL team to conduct reconnaissance and precision strikes against a high-value target located in the mountains of Kunar province. The target was identified as Abu Yahya al-Libi, a senior al-Qaeda operative who was coordinating suicide bombing campaigns against American and coalition forces. The mission required Sarah and her team to insert into a remote area near the Pakistan border, locate Abu Yahya's compound, and eliminate him without alerting other al-Qaeda operatives in the region. Intelligence indicated that Abu Yahya was protected by more than 20 experienced fighters and sophisticated surveillance equipment that would detect conventional military approaches. The mission would require extreme stealth and precision shooting capabilities that only Sarah possessed. Sarah's team for this mission consisted of 4 Navy SEALs, led by Lieutenant Commander David Walsh, a veteran of more than 50 special operations missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Walsh had specifically requested Sarah for this operation after reviewing her training records and previous mission reports. He understood that conventional SEAL tactics would not be sufficient for this particular target, and that Sarah's unique abilities were essential for mission success. The team inserted by helicopter into the Kunar Mountains during a blizzard that provided cover for their arrival, but also created dangerous operating conditions. Sarah and her teammates established a base camp in a cave system approximately 5 kilometers from Abu Yahya's suspected location. where they would conduct surveillance and plan their attack while remaining undetected by enemy forces. Sarah's first task was to locate Abu Yahya's exact position using advanced surveillance equipment and her own observation skills. Intelligence reports indicated that the al-Qaeda leader was operating from somewhere within a valley that contained several compounds and cave systems. However, his specific location remained unknown, and identifying the correct target would require careful analysis of movement patterns and communication activities. Using high-powered optics and electronic surveillance equipment, Sarah spent 3 days observing activities throughout the target valley. She identified several compounds that showed signs of significant activity, including armed guards, communications equipment, and vehicles that suggested high-level leadership presence. However, confirming Abu Yahya's specific location would require direct observation of individuals whose identities could be verified through photographic intelligence. On the 4th day of surveillance, Sarah observed a meeting between several individuals at a compound located on the valley's northern slope. Through her scope, she was able to photograph faces that were later confirmed by intelligence analysts as including Abu Yahya al-Libi and 2 other senior al-Qaeda operatives. The compound's location and security arrangements were consistent with intelligence reports about Abu Yahya's operational patterns. Lieutenant Commander Walsh decided to conduct the mission that night, using darkness and weather conditions to approach Abu Yahya's compound undetected. Sarah would provide overwatch and precision fire support from a position approximately 800 meters from the target, while the SEAL team approached the compound to confirm Abu Yahya's presence and eliminate him if possible. Sarah established her shooting position on a ridgeline that provided clear fields of fire to the target compound while offering concealment from enemy observation. The weather conditions were challenging, with strong winds and intermittent snow that would affect bullet trajectory and visibility. However, Sarah had trained extensively under similar conditions and was confident in her ability to engage targets accurately despite the environmental challenges. Through her scope, Sarah could see that the compound was defended by at least 8 guards positioned around the perimeter and on rooftops. The guards were equipped with night vision devices and automatic weapons, indicating that Abu Yahya's security arrangements were more sophisticated than typical Taliban defensive positions. Eliminating Abu Yahya would require neutralizing his guards without alerting other al-Qaeda forces in the area. As the SEAL team began their approach to the compound, Sarah monitored guard positions and prepared to provide supporting fire if the team was discovered. Her primary mission was to eliminate Abu Yahya himself if he attempted to escape, but she was also responsible for suppressing any resistance that might prevent the SEAL team from accomplishing their objectives. The SEAL team successfully penetrated the compound's outer perimeter without detection, moving through defensive positions using stealth techniques that Sarah observed through her scope. However, as the team approached the main building where Abu Yahya was located, one of the guards detected movement and began raising an alarm. Sarah immediately engaged the guard with a suppressed shot that eliminated him before he could alert other defenders. Sarah's shot triggered the beginning of the assault phase of the mission. The SEAL team moved rapidly toward the main building, while Sarah provided covering fire against guards who attempted to respond to the intrusion. Her shooting was precise and controlled, eliminating threats without endangering the SEAL team members who were operating in close proximity to enemy positions. During the firefight that followed, Sarah engaged multiple targets at ranges between 400 and 800 meters, consistently achieving first-round kills despite challenging conditions. Her suppressive fire was crucial in preventing al-Qaeda fighters from organizing effective resistance against the SEAL team's assault. Most importantly, when Abu Yahya attempted to escape through a rear exit, Sarah engaged him with a single shot at 720 meters, killing the al-Qaeda leader instantly. The mission was completed successfully within 30 minutes of initiation. Abu Yahya al-Libi and 6 of his bodyguards were killed, while valuable intelligence materials were recovered from the compound. The SEAL team extracted from the area without casualties, and Sarah's contribution to the mission's success was noted in classified reports that reached the highest levels of the American military and intelligence communities. Lieutenant Commander Walsh submitted detailed reports about Sarah's performance, emphasizing that the mission would not have succeeded without her precision shooting capabilities. Her ability to engage multiple targets accurately under challenging conditions had been essential for protecting the SEAL team and eliminating high-value targets. Walsh recommended that Sarah be given permanent assignment to special operations units conducting similar missions. Sarah's successful completion of this mission established her reputation within the special operations community as an asset, with capabilities that exceeded those of traditional military personnel. Her civilian contractor status, combined with her demonstrated combat abilities, made her uniquely valuable for missions that required both stealth and precision. Senior military commanders began developing plans for utilizing Sarah's capabilities in additional high-priority operations. However, Sarah's expanding role also attracted attention from military personnel who were concerned about the precedents being established by her assignments. Some officers argued that allowing civilian contractors to participate in direct action missions violated established policies and created dangerous precedents for future operations. These concerns would soon reach senior military leadership and create complications for Sarah's continued service. The debate about Sarah's role reflected broader questions about the nature of modern warfare and the military's increasing reliance on civilian contractors with specialized skills. Sarah's extraordinary abilities had proven valuable for specific tactical situations, but her situation also challenged traditional concepts about military organization, civilian oversight, and operational security. These issues would become increasingly important as Sarah's reputation continued to spread throughout the special operations community. Despite the regulatory and policy concerns surrounding her situation, Sarah continued to receive mission assignments that utilized her unique capabilities. Her next operation would involve even more sensitive targets and would bring her to the attention of the highest levels of American military leadership. The woman who had arrived in Afghanistan as a translator was becoming one of the most valuable and controversial assets in America's special operations arsenal. In March 2012, after 6 months of conducting the most classified operations in Afghanistan, Sarah Martinez received a summons that would change her life forever. She was ordered to report to a secure facility in Kabul, where she would meet with senior military officials whose names appeared on no organizational charts and whose operations existed in the deepest shadows of America's national security apparatus. The meeting location was a nondescript building within the American Embassy complex, protected by multiple layers of security that indicated the presence of personnel whose identities were state secrets. Sarah understood that she was about to meet with representatives of military units so classified that their existence was known only to the highest levels of government. These were the operators who conducted missions that could never be acknowledged, in places that officially didn't exist, against targets whose elimination could never be publicly credited to American forces. Admiral William McRaven, who commanded all American Special Operations Forces worldwide, personally conducted Sarah's briefing. McRaven's presence indicated that Sarah's reputation had reached the very top of America's military hierarchy and that her capabilities were being considered for operations of national strategic importance. The Admiral's career included leadership of the most significant special operations missions of the 21st century, and his personal involvement in Sarah's briefing demonstrated the unprecedented nature of her situation. Admiral McRaven explained that intelligence agencies had identified a threat that required capabilities that no conventional military unit possessed. A terrorist organization with connections to both al-Qaeda and Iranian intelligence services was planning a major attack against American forces in Afghanistan. The attack would utilize advanced weapon systems provided by Iranian operatives, and it was being coordinated by individuals whose elimination was essential for American national security. However, the terrorists' location and security arrangements made conventional military responses impossible. They were operating from a compound in a remote area of Helmand Province, protected by sophisticated air defense systems and defended by highly trained fighters with extensive combat experience. Most critically, the compound was located in an area where American military operations could create diplomatic complications that might affect broader strategic objectives in the region. The mission that Admiral McRaven outlined would require Sarah to operate alone for an extended period in extremely hostile territory. She would need to locate and eliminate multiple high-value targets while gathering intelligence about Iranian weapons shipments and terrorist training activities. The mission would require all of Sarah's skills in marksmanship, stealth, cultural liaison, and independent operation, and it would test her abilities under the most demanding conditions she had ever faced. Sarah accepted the mission, understanding that her role had evolved to a level that placed her among America's most elite and secretive military assets. However, she also understood that this mission would likely be her last operation as a civilian contractor. The nature of the targets and the complexity of the operation required acknowledgement of her contributions at levels that would make her continued unofficial status impossible to maintain. Admiral McRaven authorized Sarah's access to equipment and support assets that were normally reserved for the most elite special operations units. She would be equipped with the latest rifle systems, advanced communications equipment, and specialized surveillance technology that would allow her to accomplish objectives that were impossible for conventional forces. Most importantly, she would have access to intelligence and support networks that operated at the highest levels of classification. Sarah's preparation for this mission involved briefings from intelligence analysts who had been tracking the target organization for more than 2 years. She learned that the terrorist group was led by Iranian intelligence operative named Colonel Hassan Rouhani, who was using Afghan proxies to conduct attacks against American forces while maintaining plausible deniability for Iranian involvement. Eliminating Rouhani and his key subordinates would significantly disrupt Iranian-sponsored terrorism throughout Afghanistan. The target compound was located in a valley approximately 40 kilometers southwest of Lashkar, accessible only through mountain passes that were controlled by Taliban forces sympathetic to Iranian operations. Intelligence indicated that the compound housed more than 50 fighters, including Iranian trainers, Arab al-Qaeda operatives, and Afghan Taliban commanders, who were coordinating joint operations against American and coalition forces. Sarah's mission would require her to infiltrate the area undetected, establish surveillance of the compound, and eliminate specific targets while gathering intelligence about Iranian weapons shipments and training activities. She would operate without direct support for up to 2 weeks, relying on her own skills and equipment to accomplish objectives and extract from the area safely. The insertion was conducted by a classified aviation unit flying modified helicopters that were designed for deep penetration missions in denied territory. Sarah was dropped at a landing zone approximately 20 kilometers from the target compound during a moonless night that provided maximum concealment from enemy observation. Her equipment included a custom rifle system, advanced optics, communications gear, and survival supplies for extended independent operation. Sarah established her base camp in a cave system that provided concealment while offering observation points overlooking the target valley. Her first week was spent conducting detailed surveillance of the compound, identifying key personnel, mapping defensive positions, and documenting activities that confirmed intelligence reports about Iranian involvement in terrorist operations. Through her surveillance, Sarah confirmed that Colonel Rouhani was present at the compound and was personally overseeing training activities that included instruction in advanced explosive device construction and coordinated assault techniques. She also identified several other high-value targets, including senior Taliban commanders and Arab al-Qaeda operatives who were coordinating attacks against American forces throughout southern Afghanistan. Sarah's observations revealed that the compound's security was more sophisticated than intelligence reports had indicated. The defensive positions included heavy weapons systems, electronic surveillance equipment, and communication networks that suggested significant external support. Most concerning was the presence of advanced air defense systems that could threaten American aircraft operating in the region. On the 8th day of surveillance, Sarah observed a meeting between Colonel Rouhani and representatives from Iranian intelligence services who had traveled from Iran to coordinate future operations. This meeting provided an opportunity to eliminate multiple high-value targets simultaneously, but it also required Sarah to engage targets at extreme range under challenging conditions while avoiding detection by sophisticated security systems. Sarah positioned herself on a ridgeline approximately 1,200 meters from the compound, near the maximum range of her rifle system, but providing the concealment necessary to avoid counter-sniper operations. The shot would be one of the most technically demanding of her career, requiring precise calculation of ballistic factors including altitude, temperature, humidity, and complex wind patterns that were constantly changing due to mountain terrain. Through her scope, Sarah could see Colonel Rouhani clearly as he conducted the meeting with Iranian intelligence representatives. He was standing on a balcony overlooking the compound's central courtyard, unaware that he was being observed by American forces. Sarah calculated the ballistic solution for the shot, taking into account all environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory over 1,200 meters. Sarah's first shot was perfect, killing Colonel Rouhani instantly and creating immediate confusion among the Iranian and terrorist personnel at the compound. Her second shot, fired 30 seconds later, killed the senior Iranian intelligence representative before security forces could react effectively. These eliminations disrupted the meeting and triggered security responses that exposed additional high-value targets for follow-up shots. During the engagement that followed, Sarah eliminated 6 high-value targets while successfully avoiding detection by counter-sniper forces that attempted to locate her position. Her shooting was extraordinarily precise, with all shots achieving immediate incapacitation at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Most importantly, her elimination of key leadership personnel disrupted Iranian-sponsored terrorist operations throughout southern Afghanistan. Sarah successfully extracted from the area after completing her intelligence-gathering objectives and eliminating all designated targets. Her mission accomplished strategic objectives that significantly reduced threats to American forces, while providing valuable intelligence about Iranian support for terrorist organizations. The operation was considered one of the most successful special operations missions conducted during the entire Afghan conflict. Admiral McRaven personally debriefed Sarah upon her return to Kabul, expressing amazement at her accomplishment of objectives that conventional special operations forces couldn't have achieved. Her demonstration of capabilities exceeding those of America's most elite military personnel had established her as a unique asset whose contributions deserved recognition at the highest levels of government. However, that recognition would require acknowledging her role in ways that challenged traditional military protocol. 3 days after Sarah's return from Helmand Province, she received orders that surprised everyone involved in her situation. She was directed to report to a secure location near Bagram airfield, where she would participate in a ceremony that had never been conducted before in military history. The ceremony would recognize her contributions to American national security while addressing the unprecedented nature of her civilian contractor status. The ceremony took place in a heavily secured hangar at Bagram, attended by senior military officials whose presence indicated the significance of the recognition being accorded to Sarah. Admiral McRaven presided over the ceremony, accompanied by the commanders of every major special operations unit that had utilized Sarah's capabilities during her deployment to Afghanistan. However, the most significant attendee was a figure whose presence had never been publicly acknowledged at such ceremonies. Commander Marcus Thompson, the leader of SEAL Team 6, had traveled from an undisclosed location specifically to participate in Sarah's recognition ceremony. Commander Thompson's unit conducted the most classified and sensitive operations in America's military arsenal, and his personal involvement demonstrated recognition of Sarah's contributions at the highest levels of Special Operations Command. Commander Thompson had reviewed detailed reports of Sarah's performance during her deployment, including classified mission summaries that documented her role in operations that had eliminated dozens of high-value targets and significantly disrupted enemy operations throughout Afghanistan. Her civilian contractor status had initially made military recognition impossible, but her extraordinary contributions had convinced senior commanders that unprecedented acknowledgement was warranted. The ceremony itself was unlike any military recognition that had been conducted before. Sarah was not eligible for traditional military decorations due to her civilian status, but her contributions deserved acknowledgement that reflected their significance to American national security. Commander Thompson solved this dilemma by presenting Sarah with a recognition that had never been awarded to a civilian contractor. In a moment that would be remembered by everyone present, Commander Thompson removed his personal SEAL Trident pin and presented it to Sarah. The SEAL Trident represented membership in America's most elite military brotherhood, earned through the completion of training that defeated more than 80% of candidates who attempted it. No civilian had ever been accorded this recognition, and Commander Thompson's gesture represented acknowledgement that Sarah's contributions exceeded those of many decorated military professionals. Commander Thompson's presentation was accompanied by a statement that would become legendary within the special operations community. He said that Sarah had demonstrated courage, skill, and dedication that exemplified the highest traditions of American military service. Her willingness to accept extreme danger in service of her country, combined with her extraordinary tactical abilities, had earned her recognition as an honorary member of the brotherhood that defended America's national security in the shadows. Sarah's receipt of Commander Thompson's SEAL Trident represented more than personal recognition. It symbolized acknowledgement that modern warfare required capabilities and contributions that transcended traditional military organization and protocol. Her civilian contractor status had initially been viewed as a limitation, but her extraordinary abilities had proven that excellence in service to country could emerge from unexpected sources. The ceremony concluded with Admiral McRaven's statement that Sarah's contributions to American national security would remain classified, but that her example would inspire future generations of Americans to serve their country with courage and dedication. Her transformation from translator to elite military asset demonstrated that heroism and exceptional capability could be found among those who volunteered to serve in America's most dangerous and demanding missions. After the ceremony, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from Montana Ranch to recognition by America's most elite military commanders. Her grandfather's training had prepared her for challenges he could never have imagined, and her willingness to accept responsibility for protecting American soldiers had led her to contributions that exceeded anything civilian contractors had previously achieved. Sarah's story remained classified for security reasons, but her example influenced how military commanders approached the utilization of civilian contractors with exceptional capabilities. Her demonstration that extraordinary contributions could emerge from unexpected sources encouraged military leaders to remain open to unconventional solutions for complex tactical and strategic challenges. The SEAL Trident that Commander Thompson had given Sarah became the symbol of recognition that she valued more than any official decoration could have provided. It represented acknowledgement from America's most elite warriors that her contributions had earned her place among those who had served with the highest distinction in defense of American national security. However, Sarah's recognition also marked the end of her service as a civilian contractor in Afghanistan. Her profile had become too high for continued covert operations, and her contributions deserved acknowledgement that required transition to new roles in America's national security apparatus. Her legacy would inspire future generations, but her active service in Afghanistan's mountains and valleys had concluded with recognition that no civilian contractor had ever received before.